Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, with Sunak having secured the backing of the majority of the ERG, it seems, and certainly most of the more prominent members, I'd like to discuss if the anti-EU lobby group, the ERG, European Research Group, even serves any purpose within the Conservative Party anymore, and if we might find that it just slowly dissolves over the next few years. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the first thing I should say is credit to Rishi Sunak again. I've said this before, my opinion has not changed. Sunak is not a good politician. That is, he plays the political game very poorly and seems to have very low quality advisors around him. But credit where it's due. This settlement for the Northern Ireland Protocol, which was announced a week ago, is good for the country. Yes, all it's doing is polishing a little bit of the turd that his party landed us with quite unnecessarily. But given the years of wrangling over the issue, having a Tory leader finally draw a line under it is still a good thing. I wouldn't go so far as to describe it as putting country ahead of party, because if his party hadn't been prepared to go along with it in overwhelming numbers, Sunak would never have announced this agreement. The reason he's done so is because it was less politically risky for him to push this deal than not to. Make no mistake, had he not pushed for this agreement, this would have been the timeline of his doom. First, the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill would pass through Parliament and become law. Second, the legislation would trigger a trade war with the EU. I don't know whether it would do so when the bill became law or when Sunak actually used the powers contained within it, but it would be inevitable at some point. Third, tariffs would be placed on politically sensitive British exports to the EU. This is not idle speculation, it's what they do. We've seen them do it to great effect against both George Bush Jr. and Donald Trump. They don't target goods that do the most damage to the economy, but the ones which do the most damage to the government's support. Fourth, we would be unable to counter with tariffs of our own, because that would just drive up the price of goods, raising the level of inflation which Sunak has made it his mission to pretend he's reducing. I mean, we don't even have the legally required level of trade barriers against EU imports. We are currently giving the EU an illegal competitive advantage inside the British market because we don't have the capacity to import customs and standards checks yet. The idea that we could compete with the EU with tit-for-tat trade sanctions is beyond laughable. Fifth, we would do further damage to our trust amongst the only viable allies we have, as we not only renege on an important international treaty, but we further destabilise the peace process in Northern Ireland. And sixth, the government would be forced into a humiliating U-turn in order to end the political and economic damage that would inevitably result. There would be no putting lipstick on that pig. It would be Liz Truss levels of, well, humiliation, quite frankly. It'd be obvious to everyone that the Tories had lost, the EU had won. It'd be impossible to frame it in any other way. Perhaps some in the ERG would not mind this outcome because they think the British public might turn on the EU and be less minded to want to return. I think this would be delusional. What it would do is turn the public off the Tories. Frankly, not getting this agreement presented an impossible outlook for Rishi Sunak. In many ways, he'd have been better off having a general election this summer than going through all that. But getting the agreement also seemed impossible. How could he possibly get it through Parliament without bringing his own government down if he was going to rely on Labour votes to bypass the ERG and Johnson loyalists? Well, he has. The ERG are sufficiently divided that they did not present enough resistance to stop Sunak going ahead with it, and Boris Johnson doesn't actually have as many loyalists in the parliamentary party as the Tory press might have you believe, which makes you wonder if the ERG even really serve much of a purpose anymore. Like a lot of other Brexit groups, the ERG were formed in order to engineer the UK's exit from the EU. Tory MPs who all wanted to achieve this banded together so that they could exert pressure on the party to back moves to do so. But just as with other Brexit groups, they may have agreed that they wanted the UK to leave the EU, but not necessarily on why. Well, we've now left the EU, including the customs union and single market. There is no immediate risk of reversing either of these things, say in the next few years. So all the ERG exists for now is to pressure their party's leadership into a particular post-Brexit direction. But it seems there's no firm agreement on what that direction should be, or at least There are possibly two possibilities, I guess. The first is that the ERG are still broadly united behind a post-Brexit vision, but realise that battling over Northern Ireland doesn't really bring any major rewards. They don't care about Northern Ireland. There is a chance that reunification comes into the equation inside the next generation, and the protocol allows them to push ahead with their general plans for Britain anyway. Basically, you could argue that the Northern Ireland Protocol is not a battle that pragmatic members of the ERG will see any great benefit in. So it may be that the pragmatic elements have told the ideological elements not to make perfect the enemy of the good. The second possibility, and the one I lean more towards, is really that they're not all of the same mind on the post-Brexit future at all. I mean, the ERG once had about 80 members in the parliamentary party. That's a lot of MPs for a narrow interest group. It never seemed credible that they should all be of the same mind on all Brexit matters. Even Labour's SCG have, they've sort of got a bit of a hive mind, but it's nowhere near 80 members and never has been. And even when they are splitting, at the moment they're splitting over attitudes to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, so they're not always on the same wavelength on everything anyway. I think it's not only feasible but almost certain that ERG members have got a great deal of disagreement on the specific way forwards now that we've left the EU and the customs union and single market. It's like, so what's next? So the thing that's next, there's probably going to be a lot of disagreement. And if that's the case, and given that Sunak has already isolated the different factions within a faction to get his agreement, is there any point in the ERG anymore? They could actually actively blunt their own future causes if they spend more time arguing with each other now than agreeing on coordinated action, because it's the coordination that created the purpose for the ERG in the first place. There was never anything to stop them working together on an informal basis without the actual group. They might be better to split up into smaller, narrower groups. They would have reduced numbers to wield influence with. But if they're currently larger numbers, it's about 45 at the moment, are all pulling in different directions, would that really matter? In fact, I can see a point where the ERG just doesn't need to exist at all. With this agreement, the Conservatives have turned a corner a little. Sunak had already formally abandoned the policy of divergent approach to Brexit on all fronts. For 6 years, official Conservative policy has been to have our backs to the EU and then look elsewhere to replace our neighbours. A few weeks ago, Sunak made it clear that policy was now going to be to face Europe, work more closely with Europe on many areas of mutual interest. But that was Sunak. If he was brought down and replaced, whether before or after the next election, his successor might have readopted the back-turning on the EU approach. But with the Tories backing Sunak's approach, it's like the party has now agreed that the fully divergent approach was not working. Truth be told, most of them probably knew it wouldn't in the first place, but were being held hostage by the ERG. If that hold's now been weakened a little, if not completely broken, then even the next leadership is likely to pursue closer alignment with the EU. And that is likely to be further entrenched if the next Labour government wins public support for doing just this. After all, what the Tories are doing now is what Labour have wanted to do from the start, or a small part of it. This will shave a year or two off the work they were preparing themselves for in government. As long as the approach works and people see the benefits, the ERG will continue to become less relevant. Will they reinvent themselves, or will they just accept that their work is done and all go their separate ways to work on other pet projects? Because several prominent members have other things. Steve Baker, for example, wants to have a pop at net zero. So it might be that they all sort of think there's no real fruitful line anymore together, and they've got other things they wish to, steer the country down the toilet with. Whether, as I say, with Trussonomics, climate change denial, whatever it happens to be. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.